She should have died before nightfall, in the heart of the Wild West, where red ash basin baked under a merciless sky. A young Apache woman lay bound beside a scorched yucca, her wrists torn raw by rope, her breath thinning with every gust of hot wind. Even broken, even half-conscious. She was striking dark hair tangled with dust, skin glowing bronze against the red earth, beauty fierce enough to survive brutality. Thomas Calder heard her before he saw her, a sound too human for the desert, too fragile for a land that spared no one. He stopped in his tracks, the weight of old gun smoke and older sins tightening his chest. He had worn a cavalry coat once. He had ridden these lands as an enemy. Men like him were the reason women like her were hunted, or sold, erased. When she lifted a small knife with shaking fingers and met his eyes, something inside Thomas broke open. Saving her would cost him more than his solitude. It would force him to choose who he was willing to become. Before we continue, please take a moment to support the channel. A simple like, a quick comment, or hitting that subscribe button helps these Wild West tales reach more people who love them. Let me know where you're listening from, and thank you for riding along with us. Red Ash Basin stretched wide and unforgiving, a raw scar in the belly of the Wild West. The ground was split and sun-whitened, littered with stones the color of old blood. Heat shimmered low to the earth, bending the horizon until distance itself felt like a lie. By day, the land hissed and cracked. By night, it breathed dust and silence. No town stood nearby, no trail worth naming, only a dry cut in the ground where a creek had once run. And a lone cabin crouched against the wind as if it had learned to expect nothing. Thomas Calder had built that cabin with his own hands. One room, pine boards rough enough to tear skin if you leaned wrong. A stone hearth blackened by years of careful fires. He kept the place spare, no photographs. No keepsakes, just a narrow cot. A table scarred by knife marks. And a rifle resting where his reach could find it in the dark. Not because he feared strangers, because he feared memory. He rose before dawn and slept in pieces. His body still remembered the discipline of cavalry years. Though the uniform was gone, a pale scar ran along his forearm, clean and straight, the kind earned under orders. When the wind shifted just right, he could still smell smoke that wasn't there, burnt mesquite, charred canvas, something worse that never had a name. He had come to Red Ash Basin to disappear. The land had agreed to help. Inside the cabin, the woman lay on the cot, barely stirring. In the thin morning light, her beauty became impossible to ignore. Not gentle, not soft, but sharp and undeniable, like obsidian broken fresh from stone. Her hair fell in dark waves around her face, dust tangled in the strands. Her skin carried the deep bronze of the Apache highlands, marked now by sunburn and bruises. Rope burns circled her wrists, angry and swollen, proof that someone had taken great care not to let her escape. Her eyes opened slowly. They were black, steady, and awake far beyond her weakness. She took in the cabin in a single sweep, the rifle, the saddlebags, the rough boards, and then she saw him. The way her gaze fixed on the scar at his arm told Thomas she knew exactly what kind of man he had been. Her jaw tightened. Her hand twitched toward the knife on the table. He had cleaned it, sharpened it, left it where she could reach it. "Water," he said quietly, setting a tin cup within her grasp. His voice carried no command, no urgency, just fact. She did not drink. They watched each other in silence, two survivors measuring distance without moving. She sat up despite the pain, her posture proud even when her breath faltered. Whatever fear she carried, it did not own her. "You were a soldier," she said at last. Her English careful, edged with steel. "I was," Thomas answered. He did not deny it. Denial felt like another lie stacked on too many others. Outside, the wind dragged its fingers across the basin, whispering through dry grass and stone. The Wild West had a way of listening when truths were spoken aloud. He waited for her next question, for her anger, for her hatred. Instead, she said, "Why am I not tied?" Thomas met her gaze and felt the weight of every choice that had led him here. "Because," he said, "I don't own you." In that moment, something fragile shifted between them, small as a breath, sharp as a blade, and the desert seemed to lean closer, as if it knew this meeting would not end where it began. She tested him before she trusted him. The woman moved slowly, every shift measured, as if her body were mapping the room for threats even while it healed. She swung her legs off the cot, bare feet touching the dirt floor. The motion drew a sharp breath from her throat, but she did not ask for help. Pride held her upright when pain tried to bend her. Thomas stayed where he was. That, too, was a choice. She reached for the knife, not quickly, not in panic. Her fingers closed around the handle with calm precision, the kind learned from necessity, not violence. She did not raise it. She only held it, letting him see she could. "My name is Neol," she said. The way she spoke, it carried weight, as if the name were a boundary line, not an invitation. Thomas inclined his head. Thomas called her. She tasted the sound of it, eyes never leaving his face. "You live here alone." "I do." "Why?" He considered lying. Lies came easy, when survival demanded them. But the desert had stripped him of that habit, because no one follows a man who keeps no company. Her gaze flicked briefly to the door, to the open space beyond it, to the basin that waited, weed and merciless. She stood. The movement was sudden enough that Thomas tensed despite himself. Instinct flaring from old training, but she only stepped past him, shoulders squared, knife still at her side. She paused at the threshold, sunlight spilling across her skin, outlining the strength beneath the injuries. For a moment, Thomas thought she might turn back. Instead, she walked out into Red Ash Basin. The heat swallowed her almost immediately. Wind pulled at her hair, pressed her clothes tight against her frame. She did not look back. Thomas watched until her shape thinned against the land. He did not follow. He set a canteen on the porch, a bundle of dried meat, the blanket she had used in the night. Last, he placed the knife, hers on top, where it would catch the light. Then he went inside and sat at the table, hands flat against the scarred wood, forcing himself to stay still. Time passed strangely in the Wild West. Minutes stretched. Shadows shifted. The sun sank just enough to pull the edge off the heat. By the time the wind turned cooler, he heard her footsteps. Neol stood in the doorway, dust on her calves, breath shallow but steady. She looked at the food, the water, the knife. Then she met his eyes. "You let me go," she said. "Yes. You knew I might not come back." Yes, something unreadable crossed her face, not gratitude, not relief, recognition. "I chose to return," she said quietly. "That is different." Thomas nodded once. "It is." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, not as a prisoner, not as a guest, but as someone who had decided, for now, to stay outside. Red Ash Basin settled into evening. The land did not soften. It never did. But between two people who had both survived its cruelty, a fragile line of understanding began to form, thin as a thread, strong as steel, and just as dangerous to break. They did not speak of staying. Staying happened quietly, in the way Neol began rising with the sun instead of waiting for it, in the way Thomas stopped watching the door each time the wind shifted. Days folded into one another at Red Ash Basin, measured not by clocks, but by heat and shadow. The land remained hard, but something between them loosened, almost without either noticing. Neol learned the cabin first, where the boards creaked, where the smoke escaped if the fire was fed too fast. She touched nothing she did not need, moved with an awareness born of long caution. Thomas gave her space the way he had given her the knife, without ceremony, without demand. On the fourth morning, She asked for herbs, not as a question, as a statement. "There is fever in this land," she said, scanning the basin beyond the porch, "and old wounds wake when the heat turns." Thomas nodded. He fetched a basket without asking what she intended to gather. They walked together toward the dry cut, where water sometimes lingered beneath stone. Niol moved ahead, her steps quiet, reading the ground the way Thomas once read tracks. She knelt beside a cluster of brittle green leaves and pressed them between her fingers, releasing a sharp, clean scent. "This," she said, "and sage, and the roots near shade. You learned this from your people," Thomas said. "My father," she replied. "He said the land speaks first to those who listen." The words settled somewhere deep in Thomas's chest. He had spent years listening only for threats' hoofbeats. Gunfire, screams. He had never thought to listen for healing. They returned with the basket full. Niol set water to boil, working with practiced efficiency. She bound her own wrists carefully before tending to Thomas's forearm, where the old scar sometimes burned like a live coal. Her touch was firm, respectful, never lingering longer than needed. "You still carry it," she said quietly. "The war." "Yes, you do not speak of it." "I don't know how." She considered that. "Grinding leaves against stone. Then you will learn." That evening, Thomas brought out the book. It was not a fine thing. The leather cover was cracked, the pages yellowed and thin at the edges. A Bible, carried too long through places where faith had been tested and often failed. He set it on the table between them as if it might bite. "I can read some," he said. "Not much." Niol's eyes followed the shapes of the letters with open curiosity. "Teach me." The request surprised him more than anger would have. "Why?" he asked. "So I can hear your world," she said, "and decide which parts of it matter." They began with letters traced in the dirt outside the cabin. Thomas guiding her hand with a stick, A, B, C. She copied carefully, tongue pressed to her teeth in concentration. When she laughed once, sharp and brief, it startled them both. The sound vanished as quickly as it came, but it left something behind. The days grew warmer. The nights brought little relief. Thomas woke one morning with fire in his bones. He tried to hide it. Old habit. He split wood until his hands shook, carried water until his vision blurred. By afternoon, the world tilted. He dropped to one knee beside the hearth, breath ragged. Niol was at his side before he hit the floor. She pressed a cool cloth to his forehead, her movements swift now, sure. "You waited too long," she said, not accusing, observing. She burned sage and crushed roots, murmuring words Thomas did not know. The smoke curled upward, pale and steady, carrying a scent that reminded him of rain before it fell. He drifted in and out, voices overlapping with memory orders shouted, fires lit, the crack of rifle shots echoing off canyon walls. In his fever, the past came whole. He saw the village again, empty at first glance, too quiet. Then the prince small, barefoot, pressed into ash. He remembered shouting, remembered running, remembered arriving too late. When he woke, the sky was dark and heavy with cloud. Rain struck the roof in sudden sheets, loud enough to drown thought. Niol sat beside him, hair damp, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She did not smile when he stirred. She only pressed the cloth to his skin and whispered, "You are still here." The fever broke by morning. Outside, Red Ash Basin had changed. Water pooled in the dry cut, thin and shining. The air smelled clean, sharp with life. Thomas lay still, listening to the unfamiliar sound of water moving. "You called the rain," he murmured. Niol shook her head. "No. You stopped fighting it." They did not return to Red Ash Basin after that. They moved north to Willow Crossing, where the land bent around a shallow river, and willows leaned low over the water. The earth was softer there, darker. Thomas built a shelter with care he had never given himself before. Niol planted seeds she had carried hidden in her satchel corn. Beans, Small, stubborn things. They worked side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes with quiet words that mattered. One evening, as the sun bled gold into the river, Njol traced the scar along Thomas's arm. He did not pull away. "Do you believe people change?" she asked. "I believe they learn," he said, "if they survive long enough." She nodded. "Then we are both still learning." By the time the first shoots broke through the soil, Thomas no longer slept with the rifle within reach. Njol no longer kept the knife beneath her blanket. Trust did not arrive all at once. It grew, like the plants they tended, slow, deliberate, fed by patience. Neither of them said love. They did not need to. In the Wild West, where land remembered every footstep and every sin, choosing to stay was its own declaration. Peace never announced itself. It crept in quietly at Willow Crossing, settling into the rhythm of water and work, into mornings shaped by soil under the fingernails and evenings softened by firelight. For a time, it almost convinced Thomas Calder that the past had loosened its grip, almost. The river ran shallow but steady now, its surface catching the sky like a dull blade. Corn shoots pushed through the dark earth in thin green lines. Njol moved through the days with a calm that felt earned, not borrowed. She sang sometimes as she worked low, wordless sounds that blended with the wind through the willows. Thomas listened without asking what they meant. He had learned better than to demand understanding. It was late afternoon when the land warned him. Not sound, not sight, a pressure, subtle and wrong, like the moment before a storm breaks. Thomas straightened from the fence he had been mending and scanned the ridge beyond the crossing. The willows stirred, leaves flashing pale undersides. The river went suddenly quiet, as if holding its breath. 3 riders crested the rise. They came at a measured pace, unhurried, confident in the way men were only confident when they believed the world owed them something. Dust rose behind them in a low plume. Thomas felt the old tension slide into his muscles, familiar as an old coat. Njol was beside him in an instant. She did not reach for the knife. She did not step back, her gaze fixed on the riders with a stillness that told him she already understood. They followed. She said, "Yes." The men reined in at the edge of the clearing. The one in front swung down from his horse with a practiced ease that spoke of long habit. He wore a dark coat cut finer than the others, boots polished despite the dust. His smile was thin, sharp. "Thomas Calder," he drawled. "Didn't think you'd settle so close to water. Makes things visible." Thomas did not move. Edgar Holt. Holt's eyes flicked to Njol, lingering without shame. In daylight, her beauty was undeniable, unsoftened by hardship, sharpened by it, the kind of beauty that drew attention, whether it wanted to or not. Holt's smile widened. "There she is," he said, "worth the trouble after all." Njol felt the words like a hand on her skin. She lifted her chin, meeting Holt's gaze without flinching. "You lost something." Holt continued lightly, as if discussing a misplaced horse. "Something valuable. You see, men get upset when their investments disappear." Thomas stepped forward, placing himself half a pace ahead of her. "She isn't yours." Holt laughed. "That's where you're wrong." He reached into his coat and produced folded papers, edges worn, seals cracked but visible, stamped in Tucson, signed by men who matter more than either of us. She was acquired, tracked, paid for. Njol's jaw tightened, not in fear, in fury. Holt went on, voice smooth, young, healthy, unmarked, and rare. "You have any idea what men pay for that in this part of the Wild West?" Thomas felt heat rise behind his eyes. He kept his voice level with effort. "You won't take her. I don't have to," Holt said. "Not with you standing here." His gaze slid back to Thomas, sharp as a blade finding a seam. "You know how this works. You've lived it." One of the riders behind him shifted, resting a hand on his gun. Holt didn't look back. I'm not unreasonable, Holt said. Hand her over, and this all ends clean. I walk away richer. You walk away lighter. Lighter, Thomas echoed. Holt's smile thinned. Your past, your record, your ghosts, I can make them disappear. Land deeds, papers, a future where no one asks what you used to wear on your back. The offer hung between them, heavy as lead. Thomas felt it dig in, finding every crack he had tried to seal. He imagined a life without running, without watching the horizon, a life where his name didn't carry the weight of smoke and screams. He imagined it, and hated how tempting it felt. Behind him, Neil inhaled slowly. She had heard enough. She stepped around Thomas, placing herself squarely in Holt's line of sight. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady. You speak of me like a horse, or a rifle. Holt shrugged. Same difference. No, she said, a rifle is made, a horse is trained. I am neither. Holt's eyes hardened. You don't get a say, I do. She replied, because I am still standing. Thomas turned to her sharply. Neil. She did not look at him. Listen, she said quietly. This choice is yours, Thomas, but hear me first. Holt chuckled. This should be good. Neil faced Thomas then. Her eyes searched his, not pleading, not afraid, honest. If you give me to him, she said, you may sleep easier, you may live longer, but you will carry something heavier than guilt. Thomas swallowed. I don't want you hurt. She shook her head. I am already hurt. What matters is who you decide to be when the hurt returns. Holt's patience snapped. Enough. He took a step forward. Called her. This is your last chance. Thomas felt the rifle's weight against his palm before he realized his hand had moved. The world narrowed. The riders tensed. Holt's smile returned. Triumphant. There he is, Holt said softly. The man I remember. The wind surged through the willows, rattling leaves like dry bones. Thomas, Neil said. Not loud. Certain, he looked at her and saw not a victim, not a burden, but a woman who had survived chains and still chose where to stand. Slowly, deliberately, Thomas lowered the rifle. Holt's smile faltered. No, Thomas said. The word landed solid, unyielding. I won't trade her. Not for land. Not for peace bought with someone else's life. Holt's eyes darkened. You're choosing exile. I'm choosing myself, Thomas replied. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Holt laughed, harsh and humorless. You'll regret this. Maybe, Thomas said. But not for this. Holt stepped back, mounting his horse with sharp movements. You've made an enemy you can't outrun. Thomas met his gaze. I'm done running. The riders turned and disappeared back over the ridge, dust swallowing them whole. The silence they left behind was vast. Thomas exhaled, his hands shaking now that the danger had passed. Neil stepped closer, resting her palm against his arm. It's not over, she said. No, he agreed. But it's begun. That night, while the river whispered and the willows bent low, Thomas sat at the table with the papers Holt had dropped in his haste. He studied the seals, the signatures. He saw the lies woven through them as clearly as tracks in ash. For the first time, he did not look away. At dawn, he saddled his horse. Where are you going? Neil asked. To end this, Thomas said. Properly. She studied him, then nodded. Then go as the man you are now. He rode out with the sun at his back, carrying not a rifle, but the weight of a decision that would change more than his own life. Behind him, Willow Crossing held its breath, waiting to see what price peace would finally demand. Thomas rode hard toward Dryford, the river fading behind him until the sound of water gave way to dust and wind. The farther he went, the more the land flattened, opening into a wide, unforgiving stretch that offered no shelter from memory, Each mile stripped something from him: habit, fear, the old instinct to turn back when things became complicated. He had done that once too often. Dryford rose from the plain like a reluctant promise. A scatter of low wooden buildings, a courthouse no bigger than a barn, a bell tower that rang only when someone wanted attention badly enough. It was not a just place by nature. It was a place that had to be made just, one choice at a time. Thomas dismounted in front of the courthouse and stood for a moment. Reins loose in his hand. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest. The sense that he was stepping back into a world that remembered him better than he wished. Inside, the air smelled of ink, sweat, and old paper. A clerk looked up, irritation already forming. Then paused when he saw Thomas's face. The scar, the posture. "I need to speak to whoever's in charge," Thomas said. The clerk hesitated, then nodded toward a door at the back. "Deputy Cole." Henry Cole listened without interruption. Thomas laid the papers on the desk: Holt's documents, the false seals, the signatures that didn't quite match. He explained where they came from. He explained who Edgar Holt was and what he traded in. When he finished, he did not stop. "I rode with men who cleared villages," Thomas said quietly. "I didn't always stop them. I didn't always walk away." Cole's jaw tightened. "You confessing to something?" "Calder, I'm telling you, I know how men like Holt hide," Thomas replied. "And I know where they move their goods. If you want him, you won't find him sitting still." The deputy studied him for a long moment. Why bring this to us now? Thomas thought of Willow Crossing, of Neol's steady voice, of the way she had stood between him and the past, without ever asking him to bleed for her. "Because I won't let him do this to anyone else," Thomas said. "And because if you're going to open old ledgers, mine should be in them too." That earned silence. Cole leaned back slowly. "You understand what you're risking?" "Yes, you could lose land." "Freedom, yes," Cole nodded once. "Then we do this clean." The trap was set with patience instead of gunfire. Thomas guided them along routes he remembered: dry crossings, false camps, places where men like Holt felt safe. Days passed in heat and dust. Tension stretched thin. When Holt finally rode into the snare, confident and careless, there was no dramatic standoff. No speeches, only iron hands closing where lies had once passed freely. Holt shouted, threatened, named men who would make this go away. No one listened. By the time word reached Willow Crossing, it came second-hand, carried by a traitor with dust in his beard and satisfaction in his voice. Edgar Holt had been tried quickly. The evidence was too clean, the trail too long to deny. His property was seized, his name stripped of weight. He was sent north with chains that did not loosen. He didn't die fast, the traitor said. Didn't die important. Neol closed her eyes when she heard it, not in triumph, but in release. Thomas returned days later, thinner, quieter, changed again. She met him by the river, where the willows bent low over the water. For a moment they only looked at each other, the space between them filled with everything that could have gone wrong. "You went back into it," she said. "I did. You could have stayed gone." "I could have." He agreed. She reached for his hand, grounding him in the present. "Why didn't you?" Thomas looked at the water sliding past their feet. "Because I don't want to be the kind of man who survives by leaving ruin behind him." That night, he carried the rifle down to the bend where the earth was soft from rain. He dug until his hands ached, then laid the weapon into the ground like something finally finished. He covered it carefully, pressing the soil flat. Neol knelt beside him. "The land remembers," she said. "I know," Thomas replied. "But I don't want it remembering this." They stood together as the moon climbed, the river whispering its approval or indifference. Thomas could not tell which. Maybe both were the same. What mattered was that when he slept that night, he did not dream of smoke. For the first time in years, the Wild West did not feel like a place he had to escape. It felt like somewhere he might finally stay. Autumn reached Silver Willow Bend without ceremony. The river curved gently through the lowland, its banks softened by tall grass and pale-barked willows that shimmered when the wind passed through. The land here did not fight to be lived on. It accepted hands, accepted seed, accepted patience. Thomas Calder noticed the difference every morning when he stepped outside their cabin and did not feel the old weight press down on his chest. They had come here after Dryford, after the dust of courts and chains had settled behind them. Willow Crossing had been a place of healing, but Silver Willow Bend felt like a place meant to last. The cabin rose slowly, not in days, but in weeks. Thomas built it wider than the one he had left behind, with windows that faced the river instead of the horizon. Neole worked beside him, her movements confident now, unguarded. She sang as she mixed clay for the walls, her voice carried lightly by the breeze. He learned which songs meant joy and which meant remembrance, and he never asked her to explain either. Dryford came back into their lives quietly. They rode there on a clear morning, the sky washed clean by rain. The town looked the same as before, weathered, cautious, but Thomas noticed how differently he walked its street. He did not keep his eyes down. He did not hurry. When they stepped into the small courthouse, there was no tension in his shoulders, only resolve. Margaret Bell stood as witness. She smiled at Neole the way women do when they recognize strength in another. There were no flowers, no music, no speeches worth remembering, only names written cleanly on paper. Only a promise spoken plainly and meant. When the clerk finished, he looked at Neole. Name, she paused only a breath. Nia Calder. The sound of it settled into the room, steady and sure. They returned to Silver Willow Bend as the sun slid west. Thomas built a fire that night, not to keep away the cold, but to mark the day. Neole sat beside him, her shoulder resting lightly against his. They spoke little. They did not need to. Time did what time always does. Winter passed gently. Spring followed, stubborn and green. The seeds Neole had planted pushed through the soil again, stronger this year. Thomas learned the land the way he once learned battlefields, but with different intent. Where to turn the earth, when to wait, when to let things be. The child came at the height of summer. There was pain and fear, and a moment when Thomas stood helpless at the edge of the room, every old instinct screaming that this was something he could not fight. Neole bore it with the same quiet strength she had carried from the desert. When the cry finally came thin, furious, alive, Thomas sank to his knees without caring who saw. They named the boy Samuel. He grew quickly, as children born to open land often do. By the time he took his first steps, the river had become his companion. He reached for water and leaves and light with equal wonder. Thomas watched him with a careful joy, learning how to be gentle in ways the Wild West had never taught him. Some evenings, when the sky burned gold and violet over the bend, Thomas would sit with his son on his knee and tell him stories. Not of war, not of ghosts. He spoke of rivers that remembered how to run after drought, of land that healed when given time, of choices that mattered long after the moment had passed. Neole listened from the doorway, her hand resting on the frame, her eyes calm. One night, as the fire settled low and the child slept between them, she said, "The sky keeps what we give it." Thomas nodded. "Then I hope it keeps this." Outside, the river moved on, untroubled by names or borders. The willows bent, silver in the moonlight. Somewhere far off, the Wild West carried on as it always had, hard, beautiful, unforgiving. But here, at Silver Willow Bend, two people who had been shaped by its cruelty had chosen something else, not escape, not forgetting, a life built carefully, from the ground up, where mercy was not weakness and love was not a thing to be taken, but a thing to be kept. And the land, which remembered everything, seemed willing for once to remember them kindly.